The grand hall of the Drake Hotel, which only moments earlier had seemed like a stage of flawless perfection, plunged into a heavy silence, broken only by stifled gasps and muffled cries of disbelief. The kiss between Helena Marlowe and Daniel Rivera lingered in the air like an explosion impossible to contain, and every gaze reflected the same mixture of shock, scandal, and incredulity. The bouquet abandoned on the floor, the violins silenced mid-melody, the photographers hesitating between lowering their cameras or pressing the shutter even harder. All of it dissolved into chaos, choreographed by chance. Charles Whitmore, the perfect groom, remained frozen at the altar, his face losing color with every passing second. His eyes, trained to always maintain composure, now revealed something unseen before: humiliation. He could not believe what he was witnessing. The marriage that embodied years of political and financial alliances was collapsing in public before hundreds of witnesses. And at the center of the disaster stood the very woman who had been molded from birth never to step off script. While some guests tried to disguise the tension with discreet coughs, others could not resist the urge to capture every detail. Raised cell phones recorded the kiss from different angles, ready to sweep across social media within minutes. The initial shock quickly turned into a murmur. Elite ladies whispered about the disgrace it represented. Young heirs exchanged nervous laughter, and businessmen calculated in silence the losses this scandal could cause to their ventures. The kiss, however, was neither brief nor clumsy. It was firm, intense, charged with a sudden courage Helena had never imagined herself capable of. For a few seconds, she saw no guests, no icy glare from her father at the back of the hall, no cameras, not even her own groom. There was only Daniel, the man who appeared like a spark in the middle of a crystal performance. When she finally pulled away, the air felt thinner, as if the entire hall had been holding its breath. The murmur swelled like a wave that could no longer be contained. "This is outrageous!" exclaimed one of the Whitmore relatives, while a younger guest said out loud, "This will be in every paper tomorrow." But there was no tomorrow. The headline was already being written in real time, at the fingertips of hundreds of cell phones connected to the world. Richard Marlowe, the patriarch, rose from his chair with the expression of a man carrying not only the fury of a father, but the weight of millions in investments crumbling alongside the family's prestige. His eyes fixed on his daughter with a mixture of disbelief and restrained rage, as though he no longer recognized the young woman he had raised. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed torn between surprise and journalistic instinct. Part of him wanted to lift his camera and capture what would become the most explosive shot of his career. Another part, however, was paralyzed by the intensity of the moment. He had not planned any of this, had never expected to become part of the story, and yet here he was, drawn into an event that would change his life forever. The chaos reached its peak when Charles left the altar in hard, unyielding steps without looking back, under the awkward stares of his family. The perfect groom abandoned the perfect wedding, and the only image left was Helena, still close to Daniel, under the merciless judgment of 300 pairs of eyes. Minutes later, while guests still debated in raised voices, the first notifications began to pop up on screens, videos of the kiss already circulating across social media, accompanied by improvised headlines. Bride walks away from millionaire wedding. Elite heiress kisses stranger. Sparks Chicago scandal. The kiss of Helena Marlowe. The entire city had begun to talk, and within hours, the world would know too. Helena breathed deeply, her heart racing, yet a strange sense of liberation surged through her chest. For the first time in a very long while, she wasn't performing. There was no rehearsal, no plan, only an impulsive decision that would turn her life upside down. She had no full awareness of the consequences, but instinctively she knew there was no going back. At that instant, the most anticipated ceremony of Chicago's high society ceased to be a symbol of power and transformed into a spectacle of rupture. And the impossible kiss, condemned by some, celebrated by others, marked the beginning of a story no one had ever dared to predict. The morning after the ruined wedding, Chicago awoke in uproar. Newspapers splashed in bold letters the images of the unexpected kiss between Helena Marlowe and a stranger at the altar of the Drake Hotel. Headlines competed for space on news sites. The bride who ran from perfection, the Marlowe scandal, The kiss that cost millions. Who is the man who stopped the wedding of the year? Photos spread endlessly, multiplied by thousands of shares, while videos filmed by guests reached millions of views in just hours. The image replayed again and again. Helena dropping the bouquet, walking across the hall, and kissing Daniel in front of 300 witnesses. A gesture that seemed romantic to some was nothing less than a public disaster for Chicago's elite. Comments flooded social media, divided between those applauding the heiress's courage to defy her imposed destiny and those accusing her of disgracing her family and humiliating the perfect groom. At the headquarters of Marlowe Enterprises, the atmosphere was like that of a funeral. Richard Marlowe, the patriarch, stalked the corridors like a general facing a lost war. His team of lawyers and financial advisors convened in an emergency meeting to calculate the impact of the scandal. Billion-dollar contracts were at risk, investors threatened to back out, and strategic alliances tied to the Whitmore marriage now faltered. With every call received, Richard's expression hardened further. To him, this was not simply a reckless kiss, it was a blow against decades of carefully built power and prestige. Helena, locked away in her bedroom at the family mansion, silently watched the storm she had helped unleash. Television programs broadcast heated debates about her behavior. Morning shows invited etiquette experts and psychologists to analyze the collapse of the perfect bride. Some claimed she had been driven to madness, others insisted she had finally revealed a hidden rebellious side. For Helena, however, there was only one prevailing feeling: the crushing weight of being reduced to a public spectacle. Charles Whitmore, meanwhile, vanished from the spotlight. His family released an official statement describing the incident as an intolerable insult and confirming the immediate end of the engagement. The announcement fueled even more speculation, with columnists debating whether the heir could recover from the humiliation or whether he would forever be remembered as the groom abandoned at the altar. Meanwhile, Daniel Rivera, the man at the center of the storm, struggled to comprehend what had happened. His original intent in attending the wedding had been to discreetly document the event for an article on high society rituals. Now, without warning, he was hounded by reporters outside his small apartment and turned into a target of national curiosity. Who was he? An adventurer, an opportunist, or simply someone in the wrong place at the wrong time? With each passing hour, the pressure mounted. Investors threatened to pull capital from Marlowe Enterprises, and boards of directors demanded immediate answers. Olivia Bennett, the family's crisis manager, rushed through newsrooms trying to contain the damage, but the narrative was slipping beyond any control. The image of Helena, until then the symbol of obedience and tradition, had become a dangerous unknown. Inside the house, Richard faced his daughter with cutting coldness. He accused her of throwing everything away, of spitting on the family legacy, of being responsible for destroying years of negotiations. Helena, seated before him, listened to the words like daggers, but did not react. Silence was her only defense, though inside she felt a mix of fear and a strange, almost imperceptible sense of relief. For the first time, she was no longer a puppet in a scripted performance. The following hours confirmed what everyone already knew. Helena Marlowe's name dominated internet searches, and her image, multiplied into memes and videos, spread like wildfire. She was, at once, villain and heroine, the target of fierce criticism and passionate admiration. But amid the storm, one truth remained: nothing would ever be the same. The weight of the scandal went far beyond public exposure. It corroded the very foundations of an entire family. And faced with imminent ruin, the heiress who had spent her whole life under the impeccable shine of appearances now bore the burden of having destroyed the golden castle everyone believed was indestructible. 2 days after the scandal at the Drake Hotel, Helena slipped quietly out of the family mansion, escorted only by silence itself. The heavy marble doors had become invisible bars, every corner of the house saturated with her father's disapproval. She needed to breathe, even if only for a few hours, away from the eyes of the staff whose every restrained gesture repeated the judgment of the entire city. That was how she arrived at a small bohemian cafe in Lincoln Park, a place completely unlike anything she knew. The space was narrow, lit by warm yellow lights, decorated with paintings by local artists. The smell of freshly ground coffee mingled with the soft strumming of a guitar in the background. Sitting at a corner table, her trembling hands hidden beneath the checkered cloth, Helena waited. The meeting had been arranged at Olivia's insistence. The reputation manager believed an initial contact with the man who had become the pivot of the disaster was necessary. Helena, however, had agreed more on impulse than strategy. There was something in his gaze during the ceremony that still haunted her, a blend of curiosity and unease she could not explain. The cafe door opened, and Daniel Rivera stepped in with firm strides, wearing a simple coat that contrasted with the refinement Helena was accustomed to. A camera hung from his shoulder like a natural extension of his body, and his intense, alert eyes scanned the room until they fixed on her. There was no hesitation in his posture, but neither was there the arrogance she had learned to recognize in so many men of high society. He approached slowly, as though stepping through a minefield. Then, pulling out the chair across from her, he said, "So, you're the bride who turned my work into a global headline?" The irony in his tone struck Helena like an arrow. She lifted her chin, used to facing inquisitive stares, but not this kind of direct provocation. "I didn't plan any of that," she replied, her voice steady though laced with tension. "You just happened to be there." Daniel let out a quiet laugh, leaning forward. "I was there because it was my job. I wasn't a guest, Helena. I was the reporter covering the most predictable event of the season, until it stopped being predictable." The words hung between them heavy. Helena felt her face flush, not with shame but with the strange sensation of being stripped bare before someone who could see beyond the surface. He didn't seem impressed by her title as an heiress, nor intimidated by the magnitude of the scandal. On the contrary, he seemed interested in the truth hidden behind the gesture. "If you expect me to apologize," she said, gripping the coffee cup between her fingers, "you won't hear it." Daniel studied her in silence for a few moments, his dark eyes filled with genuine curiosity. Then he replied, "I'm not here for an apology. I just wanted to understand why someone would throw everything away for the sake of an impulse." Silence settled for a moment, broken only by the clatter of dishes in the background. Helena turned her gaze to the window, where the movement of the street seemed distant, almost unreal. Finally, she murmured, "Because living an entire life as a prisoner of expectations can suffocate more than any scandal." The answer left Daniel motionless. He hadn't expected such honesty. Between them, a new tension arose, almost imperceptible, but heavy with the weight of something that could grow into more. The conversation unfolded in a mix of provocations and fragments of sincerity. He questioned her about the perfect life she had always displayed. She returned sharp criticisms about the judgmental eye of the press. Yet amid the barbs, a thread of mutual respect began to form, a recognition that each saw themselves reflected in the other's contradictions. As the afternoon tilted toward evening, Daniel stood first, slinging the camera over his shoulder. Before leaving, he cast her an intense, almost challenging look. "Maybe, after all, your kiss wasn't just a scandal." Helena remained still, watching him disappear through the narrow door. The Bohemian Cafe seemed quieter than ever, and for the first time since the disaster at the altar, she felt something inside her had shifted. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it couldn't be ignored. In a glass-walled office atop a Chicago skyscraper, the atmosphere was pure tension. Closed curtains could not block out the city's murmur, but inside that room, everything revolved around a single question: how to save the Marlowe image after the kiss that destroyed the wedding of the year. Olivia Bennett, crisis manager and reputation strategist, paced back and forth with a tablet in hand, projecting data and headlines that laid bare the family's free fall in public approval. Richard Marlowe sat behind the desk, his jaw clenched, his fingers tapping impatiently on the wooden surface. "We need to control the narrative immediately," Olivia said, her voice firm, almost military. "Every passing minute cements Helena's image as the reckless rebel. This threatens contracts, partnerships, and the very stability of the company." Helena, seated in one of the armchairs, kept her arms crossed. The weight of their stares pressed down on her, as though she were a criminal. She tried to hold her posture, but inside her heart raced with every word. "And what's your brilliant solution?" Richard asked, dripping sarcasm. Olivia drew a breath and projected the outline of a plan on the screen. a staged romance. If the public believes Helena fell in love with that reporter, we turn the scandal into a romantic narrative. The kiss stops being an act of rebellion and becomes proof of love. With the right amount of exposure, we control the story." The words echoed through the room, leaving Helena in shock. She uncrossed her arms, leaning forward, unable to contain her indignation. "You want me to fake a relationship? To turn my life into a staged performance just to appease investors?" Olivia looked at her with the calculated coldness of someone who dealt in numbers, not feelings. "Your life has already been turned into a performance, Helena. The difference this time is that you can choose the script." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of the city. Richard's hard gaze made it clear he was leaning toward agreement. To him, his daughter's feelings were irrelevant. Only the survival of the empire mattered. But Helena stood, her voice carrying a firmness that surprised even herself. "No, I've spent too long trapped in performances. I won't invent another lie to feed this theater." The refusal hung in the air like a blow. Olivia raised her eyebrows, surprised, but did not lose her composure. "Then we need another solution." It was at that moment that Helena, almost without realizing it, let slip an idea that until then had only simmered inside her thoughts. What if, instead of pretending, I tried to find out what I really feel? All eyes turned to her. The silence was absolute. Helena drew a deep breath and continued. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to truly get to know Daniel. No contracts, no staged photos, no bought headlines. If what happened was only an impulse, it will fade. But if there's something real, at least it will have been my choice. Richard looked at his daughter as if she had lost her mind. Olivia, however, evaluated the unexpected proposal with clinical eyes. 3 weeks of real meetings. You know the risk you're taking, don't you? Helena lifted her chin. I know. But for the first time, I want to take a risk that's mine. The air felt heavier. Richard scoffed, rising from his chair. You're playing with fire, Helena, and don't expect me to protect you from the consequences. She did not answer. Deep inside, she knew the decision had already been made. For the first time, it wasn't an imposed plan. It wasn't a cold strategy. It was a chance to live something without masks, even if the whole world was ready to judge her. Olivia closed her tablet and stepped closer. Her eyes narrowed. Then we'll have 3 weeks, but remember, every gesture, every word will be under scrutiny. Helena only nodded, firm. For the first time, she felt no fear. She felt the strange and unprecedented sensation of beginning to write her own story. Daniel Rivera's loft was in a renovated industrial building in West Loop, a neighborhood breathing art and modernity. On the outside, the red brick facade contrasted with the wide windows, and inside, the space opened with high ceilings, bathed in natural light filtering through sheer curtains. Helena entered hesitantly, observing each detail like someone stepping into an unknown world. There were no polished marbles or crystal chandeliers here, but a raw, living environment, heavy with authenticity. The walls were covered with black and white photographs, anonymous faces, workers in Chicago traffic, children laughing in public squares, old men playing chess on park benches. Each image seemed to tell a unique story, pulled out of the invisibility of everyday life. Helena paused in front of one, where a woman held a broken umbrella under the rain. The look of the woman, sad and yet resilient, took her breath away. Her name is Marjorie, Daniel said, watching her in silence. She works at a laundromat near the station. She told me she never had a photo of herself. I thought she deserved one. Helena turned to him, surprised at the way he spoke of the woman, as if she were important even while being a stranger to the world. It was a painful contrast. While she had been photographed thousands of times as a symbol of status, that woman had now only one image, taken by someone who saw beyond the surface. You photograph ordinary people? Helena murmured, scanning the walls. Because they're the ones who tell the real story of the city, Daniel answered simply. Not in the skyscrapers, but in the faces no one notices. The words hung in the air, piercing a place within her that had remained closed for years. Helena wandered slowly through the loft, observing every corner. Stacks of books on journalism, an old typewriter, plants growing freely with little care. Everything breathed life, but in an imperfect, sincere way, far removed from the world of appearances she had grown up in. Daniel offered her a cup of coffee in a porcelain mug. Helena accepted, laughing quietly at the difference from the crystal goblets she was used to. They sat on a worn sofa, and for a moment, silence enveloped them, comfortable and strange at once. "So this is what you call freedom?" she asked curiously. Daniel looked at her, thoughtful. "Freedom is being able to tell your own story, without following someone else's script. It's living without invisible bars." Helena bit her lip, feeling his words echo in her chest. "I live in a golden cage," she confessed, her voice unsteady. "Everything shines on the outside, but inside it's empty." Daniel did not answer immediately. He only observed her, as if respecting the weight of that confession. Then he said calmly, "Maybe the kiss you gave me was your way of breaking one of those bars." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was dense, filled with unspoken meaning. Helena turned her eyes toward a photograph in particular, a little girl running among pigeons in Daly Plaza. There was genuine joy in that image, the same joy she couldn't remember feeling in years. "You're not afraid of exposing so much of yourself?" she asked. "I'm afraid of not exposing," Daniel replied without hesitation. "I could never live my whole life hiding behind what others want to see." Helena felt something stir inside her. It was as if, for the first time, someone had put into words the unease that had always followed her. As the day faded outside and the afternoon light turned golden inside the loft, Helena realized that the place, unpolished and imperfect, revealed far more than walls covered with photographs. It was a reflection of who Daniel was, someone who chose to see what the world insisted on ignoring. And in his presence, for the first time, she began to ask herself who she truly was when no one else was watching. The following 3 weeks unfolded like a thread of events Helena could never have foreseen. Far from official cameras, gala dinners, and the whispers of the elite, she found herself immersed in a daily life that felt at once simple and extraordinary. Daniel, true to his promise not to turn anything into a spectacle, guided each encounter with naturalness, without masks, without the rush to prove anything to the world. In the first week, they walked together through Millennium Park on a cold morning. Helena, accustomed to exclusive events, felt almost anonymous among tourists and locals who passed by without knowing who she was. They stopped in front of Cloud Gate, the silver sculpture reflecting the sky and the people around it, and she laughed at seeing herself multiplied in its curved mirror, laughing as she hadn't in a long time. Daniel photographed quietly, but not to publish. He kept those moments as personal memories, as if collecting fragments of a daily life that for her was entirely new. On another afternoon, he took her to a small diner in Pilsen, where formica tables contrasted with the loud, welcoming conversations. Helena tasted a burger served in greasy paper, laughing when the sauce dripped down her fingers. Daniel teased her attempt to maintain elegance in the face of something so trivial, and she answered with irony, discovering she could laugh at herself without fear of judgment. The second weekend took them to a community center where Daniel volunteered, teaching adults to read and write. Helena watched in silence as he helped a woman write her first complete sentences. The emotion in the student's eyes as she managed to put her own name on paper forced Helena to hold back tears. When she was invited to join, she sat beside an elderly man who had never finished school. With patience, she guided him through a simple text. For the first time, she realized her presence could mean something beyond appearances, that there was value in giving herself to others without expecting anything in return. Little by little, the barrier between them dissolved. At night, they walked along the banks of the Chicago River, lit by the city lights, and spoke about everything: fears, dreams, losses, hidden desires. Helena revealed details of a childhood marked by rigid protocols, while Daniel spoke of his seamstress mother, of how he had grown up watching her struggle to support the family. The differences between them, instead of driving them apart, made the connection even deeper. In the second week, they visited a street fair in Logan Square. Among fruit stalls and live music, Daniel bought her a handmade bracelet from a local artisan. Helena, surprised by the simple gesture, slipped it onto her wrist with care, as if it were a rare jewel. There in the middle of the crowd they blended in like any ordinary couple, and for the first time in a long while, Helena did not feel like a prisoner of her last name. The nights were filled with endless conversations in his loft, surrounded by photographs that seemed to watch them in silence. Helena would lie on the worn-out sofa, listening to Daniel talk about his stories, his ethical dilemmas as a journalist, and she discovered in him a man guided by principles, someone who refused to trade his integrity for fame or money. That disarmed her, because it showed her that true choices still existed in a world she had believed to be corrupted. By the third week, the chemistry between them could no longer be ignored. A simple gesture, like their hands brushing as they crossed the street, carried a palpable electricity. They laughed together easily, but they also argued intensely, as if every disagreement were another step toward truly knowing each other. Helena began to notice that her breathing changed when he drew near, that the silence at his side was more comfortable than any conversation at luxurious dinners. By the end of that period, there was no doubt anymore. Something real had been born between them. Their time together had torn down the walls built by conventions and expectations. The 3-week pact, which had begun as a test, had transformed into something neither of them knew how to contain. What bound them now was no longer just the initial scandal, but the unexpected discovery that together they could be their true selves, without masks, without a stage, only truth. The contract was coming to an end, and with it, the feeling that something precious was about to slip through their fingers. Helena woke up that morning with a restlessness she could not name. The sun filtered through the curtains of her room in the Marlowe mansion, illuminating polished, silent furniture, but nothing in that material perfection calmed her. There were only 2 days left before the agreement with Daniel expired, and every minute felt like a countdown. That same morning, Daniel paced his loft with the same strange sensation of anticipated loss. 3 weeks had passed far too quickly, and the thin line between a forced pact had disappeared without him even realizing it. Now when he recalled Helena's laughter at the street fair, or the shine in her eyes when she watched someone learn to write for the first time, he realized she was no longer just the untouchable heiress. She was a woman, with fragility, with secrets, with a courage he had never expected to find. That night they met again, perhaps for the last time under the terms of the agreement. The atmosphere was different. The carefree lightness of the first meetings was gone. They sat at the table of a small restaurant tucked away on a side street, and the silence between them spoke more than words ever could. Daniel fiddled with the napkin, avoiding her gaze, as if afraid of revealing too much. She, in turn, watched his every move, trying to decipher whether this was merely a farewell or if something more lingered beneath the surface. It was Helena who broke the silence, admitting she didn't know how she would return to the life she had left behind. She confessed that the mansion, the parties, the social obligations now felt like the stage of a play where she no longer belonged. Daniel finally looked at her, and the sincerity in his eyes nearly disarmed her. He said maybe she didn't need to return to anything, that maybe life could be rewritten. But he stopped himself, afraid to go further than he had any right to. As they walked down the street after dinner, the cold Chicago wind cut across their faces. Helena stopped in front of the window of a small closed bookstore, her reflection mingling with Daniel's in the glass. For a few seconds, their eyes met in that reflection, and in that instant everything felt inevitable. Without thinking, Helena turned toward him and kissed him in a spontaneous gesture. It was an urgent kiss, charged with all the words left unsaid. Daniel responded, first in surprise, then with intensity, as if that moment were the only truth that remained. Afterward, they stood in silence, breathless, but with no need for explanations. It was as if both of them already knew that, even without a contract, something greater bound them together. And yet, reality pressed in. Helena carried a last name that demanded obedience and an impeccable image. The weight of circumstance still loomed, even against the feeling that had taken root. The next day, Helena received a call from her mother, reminding her of a charity event, where her presence was mandatory. The cold, controlling voice of Mrs. Marlowe sounded like a cruel reminder that the life of appearances still awaited her. When she hung up, Helena felt torn between duty and the newfound freedom she had just discovered. That same morning, Daniel was reviewing photographs on his computer when he stumbled upon an image of Helena laughing in front of the cloud gate. He enlarged the picture, and her eyes, so alive and unguarded, seemed to stare straight into his. He realized then that this was not just a fleeting affair. Something within him was already committed, even if he didn't have the courage to say it out loud. That night they met again, and this time there was no formality of a pact, no shadow of immediate farewell. There were only two hearts struggling against the inevitable. Daniel held Helena's hand firmly, and she did not pull away. The contract was now nothing more than a distant memory. What existed between them was real, intense, undeniable. And so, with the deadline about to expire, Helena and Daniel discovered that the original agreement had ceased to be a prison and had become the starting point of something neither dared to call love, but that already bore all its shapes. The news hit like a bomb in the cold, calculated universe of the Marlowes. A photograph, published by a Chicago tabloid, showed Helena holding hands with Daniel on an ordinary street, far from the glittering halls her family frequented. The headline hinted at a secret romance between the heiress and a disgraced journalist, and within hours the story spread across social media and through the corridors of high society. The phone at the mansion rang non-stop. Invitations were withdrawn, and cruel whispers echoed among families who had once revered the Marlowe name. Inside the imposing house, the atmosphere was one of war. Mrs. Marlowe, rigid and unyielding, confronted her daughter in a room where portraits of ancestors seemed to watch in silent disapproval. She demanded explanations, accused Helena of tarnishing the family's image, of wasting the legacy built over decades of influence and power. But Helena did not retreat. For the first time, she held her mother's gaze and declared that she was no longer a decorative piece in society's display window. She said she had discovered a different life, one where she could be herself, without masks or imposed roles. Her words cut like sharp knives, but Helena knew there was no turning back. Every moment with Daniel had transformed her, revealing a strength that had long been dormant. But her family was unwilling to accept her choice. Threats were made, financial cuts, exclusion from social circles, severed ties. To the Marlowes, loving someone beyond their imposed limits was an unforgivable sin. Meanwhile, Daniel faced his own storm. The newspaper where he worked used the scandal to thrust him into the spotlight. Many colleagues accused him of manipulating the situation for fame. Others attacked him for being involved with a woman from such a different world. Yet amid the criticism, he knew he could not regret it. For the first time in years, he felt his life had found its purpose. It didn't matter what they said. He was not willing to abandon Helena. The pressure grew heavier each day. Newspapers dug into every detail of Daniel's past, scouring his work, exposing old mistakes as if they were fresh wounds. Helena's family, in turn, multiplied their efforts to tear them apart, insisting that the relationship was a stain that had to be erased. But Helena stood firm. Even under threats, she refused to yield. One rainy night, after a tense meeting with the family's lawyers, Helena went to Daniel. She was exhausted, but resolute. She told him she had made a decision. She would no longer live under her family's control. If she had to give up inheritances, privileges, and titles, she would. What she had found at his side was greater than any fortune. Daniel listened in silence, deeply moved, knowing that this was a step from which there was no return. The next day, Helena faced her family for the last time. Standing tall before her mother and the advisors who surrounded her, she announced that she would no longer allow herself to be controlled. She said she would not let her heart be traded as a token of prestige. Her words echoed through the hall, and the silence that followed was more eloquent than any argument. Mrs. Marlowe, as rigid as ever, merely turned her face away, declaring that from that moment on, Helena was on her own. But Helena did not feel alone. Outside the mansion, Daniel was waiting in the soft rain. When she walked through the gates, carrying only a small suitcase, she felt she was leaving behind not just a house, but an entire life of impositions. Meeting his gaze, she realized that the battle was only beginning, but also that she would not have to fight it alone. The storm gathering around them was not just one of scandals and headlines, but of choices that would define their futures. Society could judge them, her family could reject them, but none of it seemed greater than the flame that had been lit between them. And in that moment, under Chicago's heavy sky, Helena and Daniel knew they had chosen the harder path, but also the only one that made sense. The day of the press conference arrived, and the Drake Hotel, the very stage of the kiss that had shaken all of Chicago, was once again filled with curious eyes and cameras eager to capture every detail. But this time, Helena Marlowe was not there to fulfill protocols or embody an image built over generations. She stepped up to the podium with steady steps, breathing deeply as she faced the audience that had judged her for weeks. Every lens aimed at her seemed to want more than her face. It wanted her submission, her regret, her surrender. But Helena was determined to show the opposite. There would be no surrender, only courage. The murmur of the crowd faded as she began to speak, her voice clear and firm. She told her story, not as an heiress, but as a woman who had chosen to be free. She explained that the kiss which turned her marriage into a headline was not a mistake of the moment, but an awakening. She spoke of years of impositions, suffocating expectations, and the life that had always been dictated to her. And in front of everyone, she declared that she did not love Charles Whitmore, that he had never been the one her heart had chosen, and that she was ready to live according to her own truth. The silence in the room was almost tangible. Some exchanged incredulous glances. Others, surprised, were moved by her sincerity. Helena went on, revealing the story of the time she had spent with Daniel, the 3 weeks that had taught her more than a lifetime of luxury and protocol. She told of walks through Millennium Park, laughter in a humble diner, volunteer work, and the moments in his loft where she discovered that authenticity and truth were worth more than any wealth or status. When she finished, a stir ran through the audience. A few hesitant claps broke out, growing stronger as people recognized the courage of her act. Helena had taken control of her own narrative, transforming the scandal that had nearly destroyed her reputation into an example of strength and authenticity. She stepped down from the podium with a sense of relief, but also of anticipation. She longed to see Daniel's reaction. Outside, Daniel was waiting, his camera turned off, aware that the moment to come did not need to be captured in photographs. When Helena approached, he smiled, pride, love, and admiration in his eyes. Without a word, they clasped hands, and in that simple gesture was more communication than any headline could ever deliver. They did not need applause, nor society's recognition. Their truth was already enough. That same night, Daniel published a photo essay, but not about the scandal, nor about Helena as a public figure. He shared images of the life they had lived together, laughter in the park, glances filled with complicity, hands intertwined, gestures of kindness. Each photograph was paired with words about courage, freedom, and the beauty of living by one's own truth. The public reacted with surprise and emotion. Thousands shared, commented, and for a moment, the narrative once rooted in scandal became one of inspiration. Weeks later, Helena and Daniel walked along the banks of the Chicago River, as if they had discovered a world of their own. A violinist played softly in the background, and the city's reflection in the water seemed to celebrate their newfound freedom. For the first time, Helena felt she no longer needed to hide, no longer needed to meet impossible expectations. Daniel looked at her, and without speaking, she understood that she had found someone who saw her essence, not her surname. The kiss that had begun as an act of chaos and rebellion, threatening to destroy families and reputations, had now become the symbol of something far greater: true love, courage, and authenticity. Helena Marlowe and Daniel Rivera, free of masks, forced commitments and appearances, had finally found their own path, knowing that the future did not need to be perfect. It only needed to be true. And so, hand in hand, to the sound of the violin that filled the night, they began their new story, building a life where every choice was made out of love and never out of obligation. And so ends another heartwarming story here at Enchanting Stories. If you were moved by Helena and Daniel's courage, why not join our growing community of storytellers and lovers of fresh starts? Click that magical subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss a single exciting chapter. Leave a like, share the video, and show that you too believe in the power of living your own truth. Tell us in the comments, which city are you following us from? And remember, every story has the power to transform those who hear it, so come experience these emotions with us. See you in the next chapter, full of surprises, love, and inspiration, here at Enchanting Stories.